So when the Israelites were in the wilderness, we're shifting gears big time here. When the Israelites were in the wilderness, they evidently had livestock for sacrifices because we read about the sacrifices that they performed in a few different places. So why did they complain about not having food or meat? So really quick, you probably know the story already, but the Israelites are complaining that they don't have food. God gives them manna. They complain that they don't have meat. God gives them quail. And the question is, well, how are they able to do sacrifices if they are claiming they didn't have food or meat? So really love that question. I already answered it for the person who asked it, but I figured I would share it with you as well because I just found it to be really interesting. And I did spend some time. This person also researched it, and she did her due diligence to try to figure out, can I find the answer to this? Did not find it. I did the same thing. Did a lot of digging. I wasn't able to find any commentaries or articles that mention the scarcity of food compared with the availability of animals, or for that matter, grain, because they also had grain sacrifices. And so they did do grain sacrifices, and yet they mention this lack of food. And so here's my educated guess then, based on what we know and the digging around that I did, just putting two and two together here. So I think that the Israelites probably were able to keep a small stock of animals, maybe among the priests, but they didn't have enough for the average person to eat any meat. So it's probable in my mind that the cries of the Israelites for a lack of food and a lack of meat came up from the general populace and maybe not from the better equipped Israelites, the ones who were able to take more things with them. The priests who maybe maintained animals for sacrifices, those were off limits probably for eating. So they probably, yes, had some animals, but most people did not have animals. Most people did not have grain. And so I think that's what's happening here. We do see in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers that they do animal sacrifices, but we just don't have any evidence that they had enough of them to go around. There were a lot of people. I think some estimates put it as high as maybe a million people perhaps that were coming out of Egypt. And so they just likely did not have enough available, but they did have a little bit of grain and a little bit of a few animals to be able to sacrifice. And that also makes me think, wow, what an incredible display of faith. Every time we see them make those sacrifices of animals or grain, I think it's 3 times we see animal sacrifices and 1 time that's actually recorded for us during this wilderness journey that they are making these sacrifices. That is those priests at that time saying, here is some of the very limited food we have available that we are going to offer as sacrifices to God and burn up. And that's a tremendous act of faith to me. So I think that's really something. And then, of course, when God provided the manna, the little food wafers, and provided the quail for them, that was a huge faith builder as well. Because if you recall the story, he said, do not gather more than you need for that day. And the ones that did, the next morning, all of the extra they gathered was all spoiled and rotten and full of maggots. And so from that point on, every day they only gathered what they needed, which was a massive test of faith and a faith builder for them to trust that, hey, God's going to provide for the next day as well. I feel like there's a good lesson for us in there of trusting God for what we need every day. It reminds you of what Jesus said, give us this day our daily bread. Give us today just what we need, God, so that we can trust you for what you'll give us tomorrow. That does not take away other scriptures that talk about being like the ant and preparing for the future and being a wise steward. But certainly when it comes to our faith, we need to hold what God has provided somewhat loosely and be generous with it and understand that maybe if we don't have everything we would like to have, that's okay. We can still trust God even if we haven't been blessed with the resources to be super prepared for the future at this point in time. But if we have the availability, certainly we should be wise and do that.